patience, everyone. I know Commerce had a pretty big hearing in here just a little while ago, so thank you for your patience in waiting. First off, is there any bill introductions? Seeing no requests for bill introductions, we will move right into our agenda for today and open up the hearing on House Bill 2467. I would first turn to the Revisor's Office for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2467 would provide a Kansas income tax subtraction modification for compensation for members of the armed forces. Under the bill, an amount not to exceed $30,000 received as compensation would be allowed as a subtraction modification by an individual who receives compensation for serving on active duty in the armed forces, or a Guard member attending inactive duty training, or has completed annual training days, drill pay, initial active duty for training, regularly scheduled drill, Title 32 orders, or unit training assembly. Additionally, for married filing status taxpayers, each individual would be eligible for the subtraction modification to the extent that each individual had such qualifying income. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siebers. Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the spouse, does it matter whether or not the spouse is in the military, or is it just income derived from any job?
The intent of the bill, I believe, is they would both have to receive, spouse A has $30,000 in military pay, that would be qualify. Spouse B has $25,000 in military pay, they would get, the $30,000 and the $25,000 for combined $55,000. If they had up to $30,000, it could be combined up to $60,000, but they would both have to be military, and the pay would have to be derived from that military pay.
Okay, so they both have to be in the military.
Correct.
For the spouse. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none in the room and none online, thank you for your overview. And we would also now turn to the Department of Revenue for an overview on the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue, for our estimate for 2467, we looked at the data from the U.S. Department of Defense's personnel workforce reports and publications, and found that there are around 32,000 active duty members and National Guard Reserve members in Kansas, assuming that they all file in Kansas and that they all qualify for the subtraction modification, the full amount, the 30,000. We are estimating that we have the potential to reduce state general fund by around $10.3 million in tax year 2022, and then $10.4 million in tax year 2023. So for fiscal year 23, we would be doubling that amount, because both tax year 22 and 23 would be falling under that. So it's around 10.2 per se per tax year. That's the potential. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. Committee, any questions on the fiscal note? Yes, Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Say on that number, it talks about members in Kansas. So are those the ones physically in Kansas, or the ones that claim Kansas as the residents and maybe working in other states in a military sense? Thank you.
According to the workforce reports, what I am understanding is that these people are stationed in Kansas. So they are working from Kansas. Now, they may not have the state of Kansas as their home of residence, but they are stationed here in Kansas.
But this law would also cover those that claim Kansas as, so is the number bigger than these numbers, I guess, because this doesn't include, in your view, the people that live here that may work in other states. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that this includes everyone that is stationed here in Kansas. So I think the estimate that we have provided is is a potential estimate, and I think it's probably a little bit large. But we had to make a lot of assumptions with the information that we had.
And we may have some proponent testimony that helps clarify that a little bit too. But any further questions for Department of Revenue? Seeing none, thank you for your overview, Kathleen. Committee, we will now turn to our proponent testimony. First, I have listed Michael Kelly, Colonel of the United States Air Force. Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be heard. I'm representing the Military Officers Association of America, Kansas Council of Chapters. We have 6 chapters: Manhattan, Wichita, Topeka, Lawrence, Johnson County, and Leavenworth. We advocate for the military, and this is a support the troops issue. We support this bill. One change we would make in the definition of military service, it says Kansas Army Guard and Air Guard. The National Guard serves in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Anyone who's a resident of Kansas can serve in another state's National Guard. I have a friend who lives in Lawrence. He serves in the Missouri National Guard unit in St. Joseph. There's no reason why he should not receive this tax preference if the legislature so grants this tax preference. So I would ask that the bill be amended to remove the word Kansas where it appears to modify the National Guard, because the National Guard is everywhere that the U.S. is sovereign. This bill will incentivize military service. It's a core responsibility of our Constitution. In the preamble of the Constitution, there are 6 purposes for our Constitution. National Guardsmen and military service members on active duty help ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. So these are core constitutional officers and enlisted person we're talking about. If we put more money in the pocket of an enlisted soldier, they're going to have more money to purchase things in Kansas, to purchase property in Kansas. That will increase sales tax, use tax, and property tax in the state. That effect was not scored by the budget director's office. And I'm not being critical of the budget director's efforts to provide a fiscal note. I do take issue with that at this point and some other points, but they have a hard job, and so we appreciate their hard work, but we think it can be improved. Also, if more money is left in the pocket of the individual soldier, they can save. And if they have personal savings when there's a family emergency in the future, they can handle that themselves and not have to rely on a government intervention. So I turn to our late Senator Dole. The purpose of a tax cut is to leave more money in the hands of the working men and working women who earned it in the first place. I want to turn to the fiscal note specifically. I believe the fiscal note overestimates the impact by about 60%. I think the number is closer to $4 million per year than $10.4 million per year. The reason for that is in 50 U.S. Code 4001, parentheses A and parentheses B. If you're serving in the military, you pay tax in your home state. So if you're from New York and you're assigned to Fort Riley, on your military pay, you have to pay tax to the state of New York. You do not owe tax to the state of Kansas if you're stationed here. So to the representative's question, there's two categories of folks. There's people that reside in Kansas, their legal domiciles in Kansas, they serve in another state. Their military pay is taxable to Kansas. I served 34 years active duty. I was filed a Kansas tax return every year when I lived in Arizona, Ohio, Nebraska, Colorado, Virginia, Missouri. And I did that lap one more time. I paid Kansas tax every year on my military pay. The people from the out of state, they do not, for example, Texas doesn't have an income tax. Those folks aren't going to move, be stationed at Fort Leavenworth and suddenly say, well, I'm going to sign up for Kansas income tax. They have the legal right under the 50 U.S. Code 4001 to keep their Texas residence or whatever their home state residence is. They're not compelled. Now, if they work in a part-time job, they're a mechanic and they change tires at a tire shop in Junction City on the weekend, they owe tax on that Kansas-sourced income. But that's private income. Their military income is not subject to Kansas tax. Taxpayers paid for 2 college degrees for me in quantitative methods, so I did a little bit of estimation on my own. I calculated this 2 different ways using the proportion of Kansas to the national population, and I came up with around $4 million a year impact as opposed to the $10.4 million impact. And I think that there's 21,700 active duty people in Kansas. Probably over 21,000 of those are resident of another state, and so their income is not subject to Kansas tax. And that's a federal law, so there's, I don't think there's anything this committee could propose to overcome that if you were looking to increase the tax base of Kansas. So in summary, military members pay a tax. It's not measured in dollars. It's measured in family separation. It's measured in duty under arduous conditions. It's measured in the risk of injury or death while serving. For all those reasons, I urge the committee to support this bill with the one word deleted that I mentioned earlier. Warren Buffett said, taxes for the lower and middle class and maybe even the upper middle class should probably be cut further. I suggest that's especially true for our troops that are serving. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I stand ready for questions.
Thank you, Colonel Kelly. Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the purposes of your calculation, did you figure that everybody would be at the $30,000 a year maximum?
No, sir. I did it 2 different ways. One way I think is easier to understand. The revisor used a median income for a full-time military member of $70,000 a year. Guardsmen serve about 39 days a year unless they're activated to go overseas or to go serve in some kind of special contingency. So I took $70,000, divided that by 365, that's $192 a day, times 39 days. That's $7,800 a year. I multiplied that by 10,000, I forget the exact number here, I've got it written down, 10,266. So that income, and that covers all the drill pay and all the language that the revisor brought up at the beginning, all the different National Guard duty status. That's almost $77 million. And then I took 2% of the 21,700, which I estimated as the Kansas residents who are on active duty still stationed in Kansas. And that number came out to 28 million. So I came out with a reduction in gross income of 105 million, and then used the budget director's effective tax rate of 3.4%, and I got 3.6 million. So forgive me for doing so much math in public, but this is a taxation committee, so these are the things you get involved with. There's another way that I did it. I excluded 90% of the active duty income and used 100% of the income from the Guard and Reserve, and that number came up a little bit over 4 million. So I don't have precise data. I could certainly be willing to consult with the budget director's office and point them to the right place in the DOD that has these personnel numbers, because believe me, they know every member of the military. They know what state they entered active duty from, and that's their home of record until the troop changes it. So they have a database. They can probably cut that database in 3 notes and tell us exactly how many people are stationed in Kansas that are still paying taxes. Now, when I was out of state, I lived in Virginia, for example, I still reported for state income tax to Kansas on my entire pay. So I have not included the effect of the Kansans stationed outside of Kansas who retain their Kansas domicile and still have to, would get $30,000 relief from their AGI on this. I have not modeled that, so that's a shortcoming in my analysis. But I believe that the effect of the counting all 21,700 active duty physically present in Kansas as paying Kansas income tax is way overstated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Our next conferee, we'd like to welcome our colleague, Representative Pat Proctor, representing the 41st District. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for hearing this bill today. You're going to hear a lot of folks talk about the estimate from the Department of Revenue, so I'm not going to bog down in that very much, except to say that all the points that have already been raised are absolutely true. Not a lot of active duty service members are Kansas residents. And by way of example, in my district, I have Fort Leavenworth in my district. There's about according to the census, about 7,000 or 8,000 people living on Fort Leavenworth, but only about 500 of them are registered to vote in the state of Kansas, which is one indicator that not a lot of those folks are Kansas residents. It's not an imperfect measure, but it gives you a sense. You know, folks, when you can, as a active duty service member, you can change your home of record or your state of residence at any time. And folks, when they move through Texas or they move through Alaska or they move through one of these states that doesn't have any income tax, they change their residency. So the rest of their military service, they don't have to pay taxes. And honestly, that is really my main motivation for bringing this bill, filing this bill that you're hearing today. I want more of those folks to become Kansans. For the Fort Leavenworth community, making them more a part of our community has all kinds of ancillary benefits right now in terms of, you know, they feel like they're more part of the community. They participate more in the activities and the events of the community. They spend more money in our downtown and frequent our businesses more often. But I also want these folks to come back. You know, we've got a problem here in Kansas with folks moving out, with folks leaving. And these are highly talented, highly trained, highly educated people that would be huge for our economy and huge for our state if we could get them to come back here after they separate from the military. And I think it's more likely that they're going to do that if they're already Kansas residents. That's clearly been the case in Texas, where they've had this policy forever. A lot of military people separate and go back to Texas, where they've had their home of record or their residency for years and years. So I think, that's really the main reason that I've brought this bill. I would also say about, I would echo the comments of the previous conferee about National Guards people. And I absolutely support the amendment that he suggested, taking Kansas out. It was really just an oversight of my part. But there are many, many people, especially in Leavenworth, who are guards, they're National Guardsmen and women, but they do their drill in Missouri, in a Missouri unit. So they shouldn't be punished for drilling in another state. But again, I'm not going to bog down into the numbers. I came up with about $1 or $2 million, but because primarily the people who are paying Kansas income tax are the guardsmen, because most of the active duty folks who serve in our state are not Kansas residents, because of all those reasons. So with that, because there's a lot of conferees, I'll stop there and stand ready for any questions that you or the rest of the committee have.
Thank you. Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative, for being here. I really appreciate this bill being brought. Honestly, as I read through it, I'm kind of curious how you all and the other supporters would feel about an amendment to expand this, because it's not just our uniformed military that helps. Our first responders go through major trauma, and, especially with COVID, and I would like to find other ways to give us opportunities to support them. FBI, CIA, again, I might be blowing up the fiscal note on this a little bit, but still, I do think it's worth pursuing, and you don't have to answer today, but I would like you to at least consider that and tell us what you think in the future of a possible amendment before we work the bill.
Again, the reason I brought the bill, thank you for the question, Representative. The reason I brought the bill was specifically this issue of so many folks serving in our state who are not residents of our state, and getting more of them to become residents. So I didn't really consider that. I'll take a look at it, and I can provide you with an answer on how that might impact this.
Thank you. Representative, I have a question. Do you know if, when you were drafting this legislation, are there any other states that do tax income that have this threshold in place, whether it's 30,000 or a different number?
So the reason that I picked the 30,000, Mr. Chairman, is because that's what an E5 makes, a sergeant in the Army. That's why I chose that number. There are a lot of other states that tax the full pay, but it's pretty much, as I surveyed when I was researching the bill, either they tax it all or they tax none of it. I didn't find any other states that are doing what I suggest here, which is just the 30,000 amount.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the Department of Revenue is saying the fiscal impact is a little over $10 million. First conferee is saying something like $4 million. You're saying $1 or $2 million?
Yep. And I appreciate that. It's very difficult to get an exact number for the active duty people. And that's probably the difference between my estimate and the previous conferee's estimate, as he's counting. I really think that the number of active duty service members who are Kansas residents is negligible, because as soon as they leave and they go to Texas or they go to one of these states that doesn't tax, they change their residency so they won't have to pay state income tax. The Department of the Budget's estimate assumed that every active duty service member who serves in the state of Kansas is paying taxes in the state of Kansas, and I think that's a gross overestimate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And committee, if we decide to work this bill, I will definitely work with the proponents to get an accurate number from the Department of Defense on exactly what that quantity is. Department of Revenue does great work, so I'm sure if we could get them that hard number, they could get a very accurate fiscal note, maximum fiscal note.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Yes, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know if you're the right person to ask this, but do we have an estimate of what the average savings would be for a serviceman on this? Not necessarily just taking the 30,000, but if you average in all of the different pay.
I'm not going to do public math because I'm not nearly as good at it as the previous conferee, but I think his estimate's pretty good that the average person who's paying taxes in the state of Kansas, military service member is probably a guardsman, and they're probably serving 39 days a year. So I'd say it's a pretty good estimate. So if, probably around $7,000 of taxable income, give or take, and you would be cutting that in half. And so whatever bracket they probably in the 3.4 tax bracket, so 3% of 7,000, whatever that comes to. And again, I'm not going to do public math.
Mr. Chairman, one quick follow-up.
Yes, sir.
If these servicemen are on base and they buy their food from the commissary, do they pay sales tax on that?
No. The post exchange or base exchange at McConnell and the defense commissary do not charge sales tax. And so the municipality's not getting the benefit of that, the state's not getting the benefit of that, which is another reason to draw those folks off post, make them feel more part of the community so that, we're getting those ancillary benefits.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, I always have to remember to check online. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, our next conferee is Colonel Michael Neer. Welcome to committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought before I kind of got into my pitch, I'd just say, who is this guy that's standing up here? And what I will tell you is that in 1965, I was drafted into the Army as a private. 31 years later, I retired as a colonel. Now, in that interim period, I did a lot of things. If I had to put my hand up and say something that really mattered, I was the guy that wrote the plan and executed the plan to remove about 60,000 troops from Europe. You want to ask me what I think of the last effort that we had to remove troops? They didn't do too well. I did serve for about 12 years, either as the president for the Greater Kansas City chapter of the Association of the United States Army, focus on the force, and about 5 years as the state president in Kansas for the Association of the United States Army. Subsequent to that, and almost concurrently, I was appointed to the Kansas Veterans Commission by Governor Brownback, and I served that for 2 4-year terms, and then that was followed by a term by Kathleen Sebelius appointed me, and I served 8 years under her. And then I spent 4 years as chairman of the commission, appointed by Governor Brownback. I've got over 700 parachute jumps. I used to be 6'3". I reside in Overland Park, Kansas. And I would say I chose Kansas because this is a good place to live. What is the first responsibility of government? I don't want to pitch and teach, but it's kind of part of what I want to talk about. What is the first responsibility of government? First and foremost responsibility, and you can Google this or use some web search, and I will guarantee you every one of them is going to come up and say the same thing. The first responsibility of any legitimate government is to protect the citizens. It has the first responsibility of government in a democratic society to protect and safeguard the lives of its citizens. A necessary element of assuring our capability to provide for the common defense is our armed forces. I agree that at some point we ought to think a little broader about what we're doing. we collectively act in unison with all states in the union to raise, man, finance, and support our military forces. And these men and women deploy frequently and for extended episodes outside of the national borders to secure our nation's people and their freedoms. Too often, these men and women return mortally wounded or very seriously injured, and they should always come home to a grateful nation and homeland. The force we field must be the most fierce, competent, focused, armed to destroy, best equipped, and virulent we can muster. These men and women don't go to work to fail. They want to be a part of a highly elite and lethal force. Our communities owe that force to our families, our citizens, and the nation. Victory for the security of all Americans and a stable world is their only goal. And we should not tax them in conjunction with for their valorous action. At question today is whether or not to exempt $30,000 from annual pay for servicemen from those living in Kansas. I would suggest the objective should be rather how do we as a state encourage our men and women to participate in the common defense of our republic and state, and when the period of service is complete, that they return to this state of residence and contribute their time, labor to our economy and our society. Furthermore, how can we attract others from other states to come and live here? So what will become the target population of this action, and what are the actual tax receipts for this action? I don't know. I was glad to kind of hear some numbers brandished around because I couldn't come up with that number. I thought only the people who are in the business of raising taxes can do that. The sum of all men and women serving under assignment in the state of Kansas are approximately 21,604. And I got that out of I think, a pretty credentialed webpage. Further, there are approximately 9,644 in our National Guard and Reserve forces. I got that from governing.com. The U.S. Census Bureau predicts that the population of the states in January, all states, in 2022 would be 332,408,650 people. Kansas has a current population of 2,917,244. Do the math on that. It's like 0.8%. Given a military force of 1.3 million, if Kansas contributed a proportional number in their total contribution of men and women to the force, it would be 11,409. I'm suggesting, I suspect the real number is smaller, and I heard a couple of my colleagues kind of point to that. The states that contribute, however, the most recruits to the military come from Florida, Texas, South Carolina, Hawaii, Alaska, Georgia, and Alabama. Not from here. In 2019, I found this number. The number of Kansans in military service was 755. That's serving everywhere, not being just here in Kansas, 755. I suspect that number hasn't changed a whole lot. According to Kansas instruction, a Kansas resident is an individual who lives in Kansas regardless of where employed. A resident is also an individual that is away from Kansas and plans to return to this state. Get that, plans to return to the state. Legal residency determines which state local taxes, local tax laws apply to a military member. Military members may have a legal residence in one state and be stationed in a different state. And the Service Members Civil and Service Relief Act allows for military members to pay taxes, register vehicles, vote, and other things in their state of legal residence. So according to Kansas income tax instructions, the Armed Forces personnel, the active duty pay of a military member is taxable only in the state of legal residence, no matter where the service member is stationed. If one is a resident of Kansas, their active duty military pay is taxable on a Kansas return. Further, Kansas income for services performed by a non-military spouse of a non-resident military service member is exempt from Kansas income tax. To qualify for this, the non-military spouse must be residing in Kansas solely because the military service member is stationed here. So what is the state of residency for a service member? The state of record is the state of residency held by the person when they enter the military. Thereafter, the state of residency is the state they consider their permanent home. That's pretty loosey-goosey. Service members in the military may, without challenge, change their legal residence to a state that does not have income tax or to a state in which they are assigned. Currently, there are 9 states that do not tax military retirement income. Those are Florida, Texas, Alaska, Nevada, South Dakota, Washington, Wyoming, Missouri, and Kansas. So it's a good reason to come here now, after they retire. You're not going to tax their retired pay. Knowing that may be an incentive to change one's state of residency. Military members may, without challenge, change their legal state of residency simply by thinking that's where I want to go. But if they want to make it more official, they can go to their legal services officer and complete a DD Form 2058 State of Legal Residency certificate. That's pretty simple. I'm suggesting in my commentary that the number of service members you are seeking to relieve from taxation through this action is at best minimal, and that exempting the first $30,000 from taxation will have little effect on your tax receipts. Further, establishing this exemption may prevent serving members stationed outside the state of Kansas from changing their state of residency and encourage them and others to choose Kansas for an assignment to live in when they separate from the military service. The objective here should be not necessarily taxation, but to grow our state into a location in which citizens experience the best quality of life in the nation. We want to attract and keep able-bodied, well-educated, law-abiding men and women and families to Kansas to live long lives, prosper, and die here. Men and women in the armed forces and their families fit that mold. Let's create an attractive environment where they might choose Kansas as their home. I encourage you to complete this bill and to campaign among your colleagues in both chambers of government for passage and to send it to the governor for signature. Your questions?
Thank you. First question, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. So I have Junction City in my district, so I'm very familiar with the military and all they do, and I have a son-in-law in the Air Force right now, and I'm trying to convince my daughter and why when he gets through with his service, he needs to come back to Kansas, and it's not going real well. So probably doesn't have anything to do with taxes. How many more military people do you think we could attract if we passed this bill?
I don't know that I could put a number on that. I will tell you, when I got to the 31-year point and I was coming up on that, where am I going to go back to? Where am I going to live? I was drafted into the service in Ohio. And I eventually went to OCS. I went through Special Forces training. I went to Vietnam. I came back. I did not have an undergraduate degree. I went to the University of Tampa in Florida to get that degree. When I was there, the state of Ohio, that had previously not taxed my income, not anybody's income, decided to have an income tax. And I lived in a state that did not tax income, and I said, I'm a Florida resident. And so it was just a matter of thinking, where am I going to go? Where would I go? And at that time, I thought I might go back to Florida. And so now that comes to the question of retiring, where do I go? We have gone through here before, and I had 2 children that lived in the vicinity. And so when I got ready to retire, I looked at my wife and said, you followed me around the world for 31 years. Where do you want to go? What do you think? She said, I want to go where the kids are. And that was here. And that was Overland Park, because that's where I lived before. And when I came here, I could have moved to the other side of the state line. Could have. They taxed military income, military retirement income. Kansas did not. Further, why did I live in Overland Park? Overland Park, I think, competes with one other city in the nation as being probably one of the best places to live. Good roads, good highways, good schools, good police protection, good fire protection. You name it, it's good. And, well, the taxes kind of go along with it. But when you're getting something out of it, that's pretty good. Yeah. How good is protection in Overland Park? I remember dialing on a phone once. You know, it's a 913 number. And I went 911 and I went, and hung it up. And then I redialed the number, made the call. About 4 minutes later, a police officer was at my door. And when I looked out, there was another car parked down the street because I had dialed 911 and hung up. I call that pretty good service.
So just one follow-up. So one other question. Comment. In visiting with the troops in Junction City that stay there, and we've had great success. It's a wonderful, wonderful community. And the number one thing that we have been able to use to embrace them is the sense of culture in the community and the ability to involve them. I think we had 100 and some show up the other day for a cleanup effort up and down the main streets. We've got tremendous things going on there. But the schools, we just built a brand new $120 million high school and several new elementary schools. So I think the public services are every bit as much of a hook to get people to come back and live in these places also. But appreciate your comments today. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Representative Bergkamp for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today. If there are several states that have no income tax or exclude military pay for retirement, I guess what incentivized would somebody have to change their residence to Kansas if we only exempt the first 30,000? Because we're still not competing one for one on that basis with them.
So what's...
So like if there's a state out there like Texas where you don't pay any income tax on your income tax, what benefit would it be to Kansas if we exempt 30,000, but you could still register in Texas?
I'm not sure I'm going to answer this really well, but I'll try. Personally, I have no objection to paying taxes. I get something back as a product for those taxes, and I shouldn't feel that I shouldn't do it. I preach this everywhere I go. How do you move into the middle class of America? And I say that there's 3 things that you have to do. Get out of bed, get dressed, and go to work. Oh, and at the end of it, I might say, don't spend every penny that you've earned. You ought to keep it for the rainy day, for when you retire, for when you're not working anymore. I think Kansas helps with that. I think it's a great place to live. And what we're doing here ought to be attracting more people to come to Kansas. And to exempt that first $30,000 on maybe only 700 people is pretty tiny.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony, sir.
Do you keep notes?
Committee, our final proponent testimony is provided by Eugene Bradley with the Enlisted Association of the National Guard of Kansas. Welcome to committee, sir.
Thank you. Eugene Bradley with the Enlisted Association of the National Guard of Kansas. You guys left the enlisted guy to come up here last and keep you guys from breaking for the day, so, you know, thanks for that. Now the officers had their turn. I'd love to kind of talk about some of the highlights of this bill and kind of why we support it and why we brought it forward. To answer a few of the questions, there is a few other states that actually contribute. They've attached this 30,000-ish number to having being tax exempt. Virginia is the one that comes off the top of my head, and they do some weird tax math on top of it. Again, being enlisted, I'm not big into math and numbers. And then secondly, why this is a good number opposed to going the full tax exemption is because of the work that y'all did last year in passing the vehicle tax exemption. The state has a great tax package for military members. When you're able to say you get your first $30,000 tax-free, and then you don't have to pay property taxes on your vehicle, that's approaching that amount of state taxes that you would probably end up paying along with your vehicle tags at another state. So that's something to keep in mind. Secondly, the first thing young enlisted members do when they're still under that $30,000 threshold is go out and buy a brand new car. So they're going to love the fact that they're not paying property taxes on that brand new car. But additionally, we have to look around regionally at some of the other states of what they're doing. Regionally, Arkansas, Iowa, Missouri, New Mexico, Oklahoma, they exempt all of they're the 100% military pay tax-free. So are we coming to that level? No, but we're putting together a package that makes it really beneficial for members to transfer their residency here. And additionally, for the people I represent within the Association of the National Guard, it's taking care of Kansans, and that's why we're here. I've got an enlisted member joining me today, coming out for the first time to the Capitol, brought them along with me. Wanted them to see the process because you guys are sending a message by at least having this hearing, and for the second year in a row, we're here to talk about benefits for the National Guard and the residents of Kansas that choose to serve in the military. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank Representative Proctor and the 12 others that sponsored this bill, because it's sending a clear message to the enlisted and the officers within the National Guard that the legislature cares for them and that they're here, that you all have our backs, and we greatly appreciate that. We've kind of hit on all of the major points in my testimony, so I don't want to generate too much or take up too much more of your time, but with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman.
Committee, I'd like to turn your attention to also written-only proponent testimony within your package. And I would like to offer to all the proponents and attendees here, thank you for your testimony and thank you for your service. Pardon? Oh, we have a question for the reviser. Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking on page 10, and we're talking about the marrieds filed jointly. Now, does it say anywhere in the bill that they both have to be active duty, or am I missing something here?
Thank you. This was a little unique in that I couldn't really find any good examples. How I tried to take care of that was on starting on line 12. Basically combining the 30,000 to 60,000, and that if both individuals satisfy the individual maximum threshold set forth in paragraph 1, which is 30,000. So there may be a little, maybe a little hard to understand, but that was the intent behind that language.
So they both are active duty then, is the intent of what you wrote?
Correct. They would both have to independently have the income to satisfy the deduction. It wouldn't just be automatically doubled. If one individual was a member of the military and one was not, they would both have to have their own independent income to satisfy these provisions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good question. Any further questions? Representative Sanders?
I have a question for the Department of Revenue, if I could.
Okay.
So, Kathleen, you heard that you kind of missed the goal by anywhere from 60 to 90%. Was there anything that you heard that would make you want to rethink your number?
I would be more than willing to speak with them. If we can get it an actual number, then we can do the math, absolutely. We were looking at the source that we had, and that's I apologize that it came so much above, and we knew that it's just at a potential impact, and I think that's how it was stated, so I understand that it was overstated.
Do you think, did you count the National Guard people as the income estimate that you had for others?
Yes, we took the 32,000 that we saw and we assumed, or we said that if all of them received more than the 30,000, so they had 50,000 in wages, they would all get a $30,000 modification. So it was a potential estimate that we provided for you.
But they're not going to be anywhere near 30,000.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you.
Because I agree that only those that are actually residents of Kansas are going to have to file in Kansas. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And as we all know, making these predictions and estimates is sometimes more of an art than a science, even though we're dealing with numbers. And we also can't estimate the potential impact of having more service members declare Kansas as their state. That 755 number could increase to 9 or 1,000 or who knows how much. So appreciate all the work the department does, and we'll try to get some Department of Defense numbers to you. Representative Gardner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathleen, since you're there, I wasn't aware, in fact, that we didn't tax military retirement. And so when did we pass a statute, or do you have any history on that?
There is history. I don't have it in my head. I'm going to say probably in the 90s on the military retirement when that, I think there was actually a case.
Around 2000.
Okay.
2000?
Before 2000, sir, it was before 2006, because that's when I retired from active duty, and I told my spouse we can move anywhere that they don't tax my retirement.
I don't blame you. Okay, could you maybe get the committee the exact?
Yes, yes, sir.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Kathleen. Committee, any further questions or anything for the good of the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.